If a silly story about a kid transitioning into a walrus is inevitably too weird and abstract for children, then what happens if we mix sex and gender into it?
In what world is it more confusing to try to explain to a child a human being attempting to transition into a non-human animal like a walrus? In what world is trying to explain that less difficult than trying to explain a woman, human, transitioning to be a man, human? You kind of posting your own L's here, Matt Walsh. You might want to, not post your L's on the timeline. This is a bit embarrassing. So to carry on with our theme of looking at baby brain, objectively useless, degenerate losers in the conservative right-wing pundit sphere on YouTube, we've come across Matt Walsh. I don't think I've ever actually reacted to a Matt Walsh video on stream, and especially not for the YouTube channel. So this is a bit of a novel experience for you all. I have, however, seen other people react to Matt Walsh, and this seems to be, a logical titan, as it were. A man of vast intelligence compared to the others like Steven Crowder or Ben Shapiro that I've already reacted to, of which you could find links on the screen somewhere too, I'm sure. But anyway, here we have Matt Walsh has apparently written a book for children, and a transgender YouTuber, if that could even exist. I would certainly never be a trans YouTuber. No way. Reacts to his book, Johnny the Walrus. And, there are some right-wingers that will give a little bit of, mileage to trans people and not be just overtly disgusting, reprehensible pieces of garbage. But I don't think we'll find that here from Matt Walsh. But let's see. Who knows? There's no way to know, right? Until we watch. So let's go. Apparently, this is Samantha Lux, is the transgender YouTuber that reacted to the book. I've never seen anything from this person, but she seems very pretty, so that's cool. As somebody who's recently started dabbling in makeup, she's much more advanced than I am, and I am admiring that. Goddamn. But let's go.
Today, we're going to be canceling Samantha Lux, who is a YouTuber and, quote, trans woman that is a biological male with a YouTube channel.
Got him again. Easiest dunk of Matt Walsh's life, dude. Do you think it took him a lot of time to come up with that one? I honestly do wonder how much brain power it requires to be like, you say you're a trans woman. That means you're actually a man. Good one, dude. I've never heard of this one before.
Actually, a quite popular channel with well over 600,000 subscribers somehow. Sam has many videos promoting transgenderism and quite often responding to perceived instances of transphobia. One of the most recent videos on the channel targets, if you can believe it, none other than the leading LGBT children's author on the planet, yours truly. Sam stumbled across my children's book, Johnny the Walrus, and does not approve. Specifically, my video where I read the book to a group of children has provoked Sam's ire in a video titled, "Transphobes Are Writing Children's Books. Trans Girl Reacts."
Fuck.
This is good. I am sincerely interested to hear how a trans girl, quote unquote, reacts to Johnny the Walrus. Perhaps this will be a point-by-point rebuttal. Perhaps evidence and science and logic and bulletproof moral arguments will all be marshaled. And by the end of the video, I will have completely changed my mind.
That would be a novel concept, especially if people on the right could start doing that as well. But unfortunately, it seems to be the case that if you do wish to find a bullet-by-bullet debunk of a certain ideology, you're only really going to find that on the left wing. Because there aren't actually very many right-wingers out there that will do that. Usually, they just vaguely gesture at imagined hypocrisy and completely what about to some other bullshit that's not really relevant in order to try to put up the facade to their brainlit audiences that they're actually debunking points when they're most often not. And this is evidenced by a variety of videos that I've put out on the YouTube channel already, where literally nothing about the actual topic at hand is discussed or debunked, and you just talk about other things. So it would be a novel concept if the right wing did it. I do agree with Matt Walsh there, but I think he's specifically talking about how it would be cool to see from the left. And if you wanted to see that, it's out there.
Realized the error in my ways, repented of my anti-trans beliefs. Maybe even because of this video that we'll watch together, I will become trans myself. It's possible. So let's watch some of this and see what our friend Samantha Lux brings to the table.
Now, if you're familiar with the concept...
If we're honest, I don't think Matt Walsh has that bad of a canvas to transition to being a woman. We've got a lot of soy elements there that are usually stereotypically for women and how society expects women to look. You just shave the beard off. Unfortunately, we're a bit old, but it's never too late to transition. The canvas is there, is all I'm saying. If you wanted to sculpt that marble, you could. I don't think you'd have the worst go of it.
Now, if you're familiar with the content that I create here on my channel, if you're familiar with the arguments that conservatives love to make about trans people, you would be familiar with transphobes' claim that we are indoctrinating their children, that we're making their children gay, that we're forcing their young tomboy daughter to become a boy. Matt Walsh, if you are not familiar with, is like an infamous transphobe on YouTube, posted a video 1 week ago reading his book, Johnny the Walrus, to a bunch of little kids.
Okay, so we're off to a rough start here already. A few points. First, I do not believe, Sam, that you are forcing any child to do anything or making any child do anything.
Well, that would be contradictory to the talking points of a lot of the people that seem to share your audience and your ideology. So let's see how we go on with this idea. You know, we're kind of like, ooh, Samantha, you say that I'm doing this, but actually I don't do that. You say that, you know, I say you're doing this. Well, actually, I don't think you're doing that. And I'm going to one-up you and get in front of this argument. So let's see how it goes.
I am accusing you and your fellow propagandists of trying to heavily influence children with falsehoods, distortion, lies, and other forms of insanity that they, the children, do not have the mental capacity to sort through.
Like how men and boys have to wear blue and be masculine and be into sports and be gruff and can't be emotional, all this kind of thing. We would never force those concepts onto men and boys because those aren't natural. Those are things that society has invented. There's no reason that we would force these things onto kids. Much the same way, like we would never be like, oh, well, women, your place is, you know, at the home. You should be barefoot and pregnant when you get older, married to a man and have children. And that's essentially your entire job is to care for the house. We would never have ideas such as that for how women and girls are supposed to be acting. You know, women and girls, they have to be more feminine, wear dresses. We would never push this kind of ideology based on falsehoods, distortions, and just outright lies. That would be foolish, especially in regards to the arguments we're trying to make in this video.
So indoctrination does not often involve physical force because you cannot physically force someone to believe something. Belief requires mental assent, not physical assent.
I guess it depends on how you define physical, because I think that should you get enough institutional power that you can start making changes to, let's say, the curriculum of public schools to the point where you're trying to get them to omit certain parts of, let's say, America's history and its founding and the atrocities that it committed, especially to a certain subset of marginalized peoples. At that point, is that considered physical? If you're wielding institutional power that you've been able to gain in order to distort children's view of history, of facts and objective truths that we've been able to record in history, you kind of get into a bit more of physical realm, even if it's not overtly so. There are certainly levels to this, but the right wing would never do that.
You can coerce and trick people into believing things, and when they're children, that's very easy to do.
Which is kind of like how people on Matt Walsh's side of the fence will try to put out textbooks that claim that slaves actually enjoyed being slaves and enjoyed their work. And how the slave owners, once the slaves were emancipated, had such a rough time living their lives and stuff like that. There was that famous textbook page that was shared. It was in some conservative area of the country. I don't know if anybody's gonna have a link to that.
I appreciate
the linky. Oh. Hell yeah. Let's look at this. Let's look at propagandizing to children and utilizing the fact that they are easily manipulated considering they are young in order to spread lies, falsehoods, and distortions to them. Chapter 10. Secession and the Civil War. Kate Stone was 20 years old and a member of a wealthy planter family when the Civil War began. After Kate's father died, her mother, Amanda, oversaw the family's business affairs. In 1860, the Stones moved to a cotton plantation near the Mississippi River in East Carroll Parish. With more than 1,000 acres and 150 slaves, the family's future seemed secure. However, everything changed once the mildly less racist people attacked. In 1861, after Louisiana's secession from the United States in January and the beginning of the Civil War in April, the lives of everyone on the Stone plantation changed. Secession is the withdrawal of a state from the Union. Kate kept a diary and wrote about many of the changes in their lives. Now, at this point, I mean, this is kind of just a retelling of these people's lives. And in theory, that's not that bad, as long as you have other information included, like how slavery was bad. Like, so if this is secession in the Civil War, if this is only a minor part of a broader story about secession in the Civil War, I don't think that is necessarily bad, at least from what we've read so far, but let's continue. In her diary, Kate expressed her firm Confederate patriotism, insisting, quote, "Our cause is just and must prevail," aka continuing to be able to use and trade black people, African people, human beings as property. But even for a patriot, the war's hardship became difficult to take. Union forces arrived on the family's plantation in 1862. With them came a justified fear that their slaves would abandon the plantation for the freedom they believed the Union Army would provide. In an attempt to limit her losses, Samantha Stone sent 120 of her slaves to Texas in 1863. She and Kate were forced to follow the slaves to Texas later that same year. In the family's absence, the few remaining slaves took over the plantation and moved into the family's home, dividing the rooms and the Stones' remaining personal property among themselves. The Stone women would remain refugees, people who were forced to leave their home or country, until the end of the war in 1865. Refugees, they say. Wonder if we have some takes about refugees nowadays from these kinds of people. They were able to reclaim their plantation, but due to emancipation, the freeing of slaves, lost all their property in slaves. Oh no, they could no longer keep human beings as property, as capital. This is being painted as a bad thing. The family had to face the new reality of planting and harvesting their fields with freed people who, Kate regretted, now demanded high wages. And it all goes on. Now, if we're gonna be poo-pooing the concept of left-wing people and people that affirm the valid and scientifically accurate identities of trans people as being propagandists, as using lies, distortions, and manipulations of facts as a bad thing for what you think trans people are doing and what you accuse them of doing, then you would imagine that you would probably not really agree with everything that has been said in that textbook or the way that it has been written and displayed to children. But I wouldn't expect Matt Walsh to be able to read at the level that I was currently reading, so that might even be a difficult ask.
Called infamous, and I won't take any issue with that label. But I am not an infamous transphobe because I'm not a transphobe at all. And when I say I'm not a transphobe, I'm not saying it to gain your approval or to convince you that I'm not bigoted. Couldn't give it less.
You wouldn't have to do that. Like, it would take a very, very small and smooth marble-like brain to be able to conceptualize a reality where Matt Walsh is not a bigot. That's a Sisyphusian boulder that you're not going to be able to push up the hill, Matt Walsh. Given the absolute breadth of what you've been put on the internet, the absolute diarrhea you've thrown everywhere, that's a hard task, is what I'm going to say. And I don't think you have the work ethic to make it happen.
It's less of a damn if you think that I'm bigoted or not. I mean, it doesn't matter to me. I'm concerned with definitions. And the definition of phobia is irrational fear. I'm not afraid of trans people. If I was, I wouldn't spend so much of my time saying things that I know will make you angry.
That's not necessarily true. You could be afraid of something and still talk about how this thing is bad and how we should be able to do things that make it so that, in your mind, your justifiable fears don't come to fruition. So, for instance, there are people out there who are afraid of spiders. You know, they're pretty spooky. They're kind of made to look spooky. So, there are also a lot of them that are dangerous to humans. And if they bite you, you could die. So, because some may have an irrational fear of certain kinds of spiders, like common house spiders that can't kill you, and actually do have some utility in the fact that they eat some of the bugs, and if they're not in your way, then they're kind of doing you a service. Some people do have an irrational fear of spiders in general, and we still do things to make it so that these spiders do not get in our way. The same kind of concept I do think can be applied to irrational fears of different ways of life. So for instance, if you're not a big fan of people who regularly partake in the smoking of cannabis, and you, for whatever reason, have an irrational fear of those kinds of people, you could just not talk to them or interface with them in any way. And that would be the way that you would solve that issue. Or you could try to criminalize cannabis and use it to stamp out the liberty of people in an authoritarian manner and force them to stop doing it. You know, and in that way, you could analogize that to spiders, where you kill the spiders, or you could just capture them in a cup and put them outside if they get in your way, or leave the ones that are alive in your home where they are and ignore them. There's a lot of different things you could do with irrational fears.
My fear, and it is not irrational, is of the effect that trans propaganda has on society, and especially on kids.
Because, you know, trans people are just so powerful. It is true that, in a general sense, trans people are very powerful. You have to, as a trans person, go against the norms of society. You have to be willing to subject yourself to all kinds of negative attention, emotionally, socially, if not physically, as a trans person. That is not an easy thing for a lot of people to do. To be gender non-conforming in a general sense, much less fully transition, is not an easy thing to do. That's a difficult task right there, which is why Matt Walsh wears flannels, has the background he has, keeps his beard the way he does, so that he fits neatly, like the coward he is, into what he thinks society should expect somebody like him to look. There are so few trans people in general compared to the amount of cis people, and there are especially less when it comes to those that have any kind of institutional power whatsoever. It is a very marginalized identity that is very powerless in a lot of places, and people like Matt Walsh support policies and ideologies that make them even more powerless and in fact put their lives in peril. But, you know, somehow they're infinitely powerful and scary because of how effective they could be at propagandizing in society, but also somehow also these completely weak, meek, feeble, small-minded, you know, losers.
So we have that clarified. Let's continue. We're going to have to skip around a little bit.
We clarified nothing. That did not clarify a damn thing because it was not coherent.
Because Sam's video is long, and it seems like a little too self-involved even for me to spend too much time reacting to somebody else reacting to one of my videos. But we'll watch enough to get the gist and to discover whether Sam will be able to make any arguments that will disprove or undermine my central points. Let's keep going.
All right, do you understand the comparison that's going to be happening here? He's like, this book is about a little boy who thinks he's a walrus and his mom...
Oh, by the way, not to say that you need to pass to be trans, but I guarantee you that any person in Matt Walsh's audience, if they see Samantha Lux without knowing anything about her, if they just see, like, this is the image, they are immediately thinking this is a woman because it's a societal construct of what a woman should be like. Samantha Lux has decided to aesthetically look like what society expects women to look like. I guarantee you that Matt Walsh's fan base, without knowing anything else, just having the aesthetics here, would be like, oh, that's a woman. And in fact, I'm probably attracted to her, is what they would say.
Also is convinced that he's a real walrus. Do you get the correlation? It's going to be about a little boy that thinks he's a girl or something, and the mom is convinced that he's a real girl. How creative. How did you ever come up with such a creative, powerful analogy for children?
It is the helicopter meme.
I don't understand what you're talking about.
It's literally just the helicopter meme, but in book form. Like, we've tried a little bit harder than we probably have to if you're Matt Walsh making this book.
Yeah, well, you're right. It's not creative. It's not creative at all. I mean,
yeah, I'm an Apache attack walrus. Let's go. Yeah, to be fair, Walrai, as I believe the plural is, you put a Ushanka and an AK-47 or a Kalashnikov on this dude, holy shit, that is a force to be reckoned with. An attack walrus is no joke. That's some sauce right there. That's a big boy. It's a big boy.
In between somebody identifying as a different sex and someone identifying as an animal has been done a million times. I'm not the first to do it.
True.
South Park did it a decade ago.
We're like mildly self-aware.
The problem is that nobody on your side has ever come up with anything approaching an effective response to the analogy.
That's actually not true. But of course, Matt Walsh isn't going to go out and look for those effective responses. And if he did find it, he would just pretend he didn't see it, you know? He would just pretend I do not see it.
You've never been able to explain why it's wrong. All you can do, all you ever do, is just scoff that you've heard the point before. Well, we know you've heard it, and you're going to keep hearing it over and over again until you answer it.
So what's the major charge? It depends on what we're saying here. So he says somebody identifying as a different sex. You know, reading into this a little bit, describes a little bit of the conflation that conservatives and right-wingers have between sex and gender, thinking they're the same thing when they're not. There is biological sex in that if you have a certain set of chromosomes, you will be a man, a woman, or intersex, or whatever else. However, gender is not the same. So as somebody who myself, I was born with the chromosomes that make me a man, I have a cock and balls, very well endowed if you must know. I've got a pretty deep voice. So my sex is what I do with your mother on a regular basis. However, it is also male, at least by my chromosomes and now the genitalia that is given me. However, the gender that I have is a bit different. It seems like gender is actually the way you present yourself to society. It is a societal construct. There are societies of the past that did not have the same strict and rigid binary between man and woman that we have today. In fact, a lot of work has been done by people on the right to conflate sex and gender, to conflate the biological aspect of being a certain sex to the social performance of being a certain gender, to the point where it becomes difficult for dumbasses like Matt Walsh to parse the differences between the two and makes it very easy for them to propagandize to people in this way. Because it's just science, man. It's like, oh, well, can you identify as an attack helicopter? Can you identify as a walrus if trans people are valid? It's like, well, no. the gender expression that we interface with in society, it's going to be a lot harder for you to come across as a seal or a walrus than it is to be a woman or a man.
What is this thing doing on the floor?
We don't have to worry about that. We're going to read the book now.
This man has never met a kid in his whole life. He's like, sit down, we're gonna read the book. I'm here for half an hour and then I gotta go, so sit down so I can film, okay?
I don't know that Matt Walsh has never met a child. However, I do agree that Matt Walsh is probably just there for the photo op to read the book and shill it to get people to buy it. I don't know that he cares necessarily about any of the kids or educating anybody.
No, I think the problem is that you've never been around a dad before, which maybe I would have already guessed.
Laugh with me, chat. Now that is a joke I've never heard before, ladies and gentlemen. I have a very firm belief, nearly unshakable belief, that all of the daddy issue arguments that you'll hear from people is just projection. That's my belief. It's been used against me before. So I have a father, shocker, right? And he immigrated here from Honduras when he was 18, found my mom, made me. Now, he's working all the time. Eventually, my mom and dad split, and they ended up living in separate places. You know, these things happen in relationships. It is what it is. What can you do? So they end up living in different places. However, my dad, for like a period of many years, took 5 to 6 days, out of his week to drive 45 minutes to pick me and my sister up, to then take us to where he lived or take us out to eat or play like mini golfing or do whatever thing we were going to do. For 5 to 6 days a week, he would do this because he wanted to have the most active part of our life possible, even though he did not live with us. And in this way, he actually did more and worked harder to be an active part of my life, my sister's life, than dads that even live with their kids. But I get these claims that like, oh, you're fatherless. You've got daddy issues. That's why your gender is what it is. And my firm belief, like I said before, is that the people that give the daddy issues claims are just projecting. Like, I guarantee you that Matt Walsh at some point in his life had some kind of gender non-conforming interest. Maybe, he wasn't a big fan of sports. Maybe he wasn't a big fan of physical activity. And his dad was probably like, yo, rub some dirt in it. Don't be a little bitch. That's what women do. And, these kinds of things. I guarantee, like, even a small amount of pressure to be this kind of super masculine, boys are supposed to be turning into men, and this is how things are supposed to be. I guarantee you that most of the time, the daddy issues claims are from people who have bad relationships with their own parents.
But Johnny's mom's phone said it's not just pretend. So she went on her phone, and there were people telling her that this isn't pretend. He's really a walrus. Only a bigot would say that.
Bro, these kids do not give a fuck about what's going on right now. These kids do not give a shit, man. Look at that. This is all of the other kids, except they're trying to be presentable because they know there's a camera around, They're trying to be nice. They're giving Matt Walsh the time of day. This kid, that's everybody in chat right now, just making finger guns and pretending to shoot things out of the sky. Now that is the Sigma right there.
How dare you offend? What's a bigot? Anybody know?
You're getting read a book by one right now.
They don't know what you're talking about. You don't see their face? Did he run this past like an actual children's author? Of course they don't know what a bigot is. They're 4. I mean, it does make sense that he would go for children because, they have the same capacity for intellectual thought as him. Like, babe, if you're gonna write a children's book, write it for children. Write it using words that they understand and that they know.
So, like, do you remember when Matt Walsh was like, I'm not scared of trans people because they're trans or the people themselves. I'm scared of the impact they could have on propagandizing to children. That's my fear. So I'm not transphobic because, that's projection, obviously, because the entire MO of conservatism and this kind of conservative concepts of how to raise a child, that's what you do. You lie to your kids. You force them to do certain things they don't want to do because you think that's how it should be in society. Boys should do this. Girls should do that. When it's not actually true. This is not biological, at least not in the society we live in anymore. So, like, I can easily see how Matt Walsh would be like, oh, this comment about how I can see why Matt Walsh is targeting children because they have the same mental capacity as he does. You'd be like, oh, well, that's projection because that's what you trans people are doing to kids. It's still projection, but only for Matt Walsh's end. Because what people like Samantha Lux and just trans people in general who are advocating for trans rights, it's literally just education. We don't have to twist facts. We don't have to change what's right and distort things. We're literally just advocating for more education on topics related to gender. That's literally it. More often.
Children, write it using words that they understand and that they know and that you don't have to explain for them to understand what you're trying to say through your book.
First of all, don't call me babe. Second, Did I run it by an actual
Uh-oh. Might get Matt Walsh a little hot and bothered if you call him babe. Be careful. Wouldn't want that to happen. Then he'll be really afraid of trans people. God damn.
children's author? Yes, I ran it by myself. And when myself came to myself and said, self, what do you think of this children's book idea? Myself responded, self, that's an exceptional idea.
All right, let's go, dude. So just because you're a parent, you're an authority on what is good for children in regards to the formatting of a children's book, and also just you know everything about what it means to be a parent and how best to do it, simply because you've had a child. Like, couldn't a trans person, like a trans man who has a child, couldn't you say the same thing like, oh, well, this trans man has a child, so they obviously know what's best for their kid because they are a parent as well. So if I write this pro-trans book trying to explain to kids the difference between people and how it's okay for boys to wear dresses or whatever, however we're going to format that, using that argument, you can't go against it. You have no arguments against it, Matt Walsh. You might want to get a better argument than that one, my friend.
Sam also says that some of these concepts are above a child's head. Yeah, Sam, that's the point. Now you're getting it. If a silly story about a kid transitioning into a walrus is inevitably too weird and abstract for children, then what happens if we mix sex and gender into it?
In what world is it more confusing to try to explain to a child a human being attempting to transition into a non-human animal like a walrus? In what world is trying to explain that less difficult than trying to explain a woman, human, transitioning to be a man, human? You kind of posting your own L's here, Matt Walsh. You might want to, not post your L's on the timeline. This is a bit embarrassing.
Does it suddenly become more appropriate for children?
Yes, because there's certainly a difference between transitioning from a human being to literally a walrus.
If a child, as you say, isn't even old enough to understand what a bigot is, or to hear the word, then is he old enough to be introduced to a concept like transgenderism?
I mean, you're doing that right now, so obviously yes. I don't know that I agree with Samantha Lux about the bigot thing. I think you could probably explain to a 4-year-old child what a bigot is, but I don't know that Matt Walsh would be the delivery mechanism for actually effectively doing that.
If he can't understand bigots, can he understand what it means for a boy to have a girl mystically trapped inside him? If my book is above his head.
That being said, I don't know that I've ever cared very much for the whole idea of, oh, I was born in the wrong body or I'm trapped in the wrong body. I don't know. It seems like an oversimplification for the fact that it's supposed to be an oversimplification in order to try to help people who don't understand wrap their minds around it. And I can understand how it could be confusing for some people, but it's supposed to be not confusing. It's an oversimplification for that purpose. I don't know. I think there are probably better devices you could use in a literary sense to convey that message.
What about a choice that will fundamentally change his life and alter him physically and biologically forever? Is that above his head too?
Not forever. If a child is young enough and you go through the rigmarole of the medical system to get them to the point where they could even be put on puberty blockers, objectively, puberty blockers are reversible. It just delays the puberty to the point where we could, from the kid, the parents, the medical professionals analyzing them, decide whether or not they want to continue with any kind of hormone replacement therapy and yada, yada, yada to transition further. There's a lot more that goes on there than what transphobes like Matt Walsh think. Matt Walsh thinks oh, well, this is how it works, okay? Trans people, one day a girl wakes up, they say, I want to be a boy. And then they go out, get a fake penis and staple it to their pelvis. Or a boy wakes up one day and is like, oh, wow, I want to be a girl. So they go out, chop their cock and balls off. There you go. Now you're a woman. You're not educated enough on the actual processes behind transitioning to be able to engage in this argument. But they do it anyway, because who would expect mediocre people to not try to step foot in discourse that they don't understand? It's a lot less simple than he makes it out to be.
You'll need to eat worms and to put on gray makeup.
Wait, do walruses eat worms? I don't know if we're talking about walrus here.
The worms give you whiskers. The gray blends you in, the doctor says. And a simple procedure cuts feet into fins.
So this is the false assumption that you have to have some sort of surgery on your genitalia to be a trans person, or that's an intrinsic want of every trans person. I am a trans person. I identify as non-binary. By definition, I do not identify as the gender assigned at birth. I am trans. However, I very much appreciate the fact that I was born with a cock and balls. So I do not have any inclinations to have surgery to change that. And that's fine. There are trans women out there who are fine with their penises. Not every trans person wants to get bottom surgery. Not everybody wants to do this, and you don't need to want to do that to be trans. But that being said, if it is the case that you do wish to have those surgeries, that is also fine. It's worse than that. The worms are a metaphor for hormones. I guess they are in this way because they say you'll grow whiskers or whatever. And, testosterone will make you as a AFAB person more likely to grow facial hair.
The doctor wants to cut into Johnny and make him into a walrus.
The doctor doesn't want to do that, by the way. Depending on how old the person is, a lot of the time it's an adult making the decision for themselves to get this kind of surgery. But if it's not, then it's the doctor, the parent, the child, all going through an absolute rigmarole, a Rube Goldberg machine of like processes and evaluations in order to determine whether or not that's a thing that is going to happen. Like, there are not doctors out there super excited to perform gender confirmation surgeries on people in general, much less kids. Much the same way that there aren't doctors out there super excited to perform abortions for pregnant people, which is another common conservative talking point, where they won't criminalize women or people who are pregnant for getting abortions. They will criminalize the doctors instead because it is easier and more morally justifiable in the public eye for them to do that.
It's gross eating worms, Mom. They're all so dang twitchy. He doesn't want to eat worms.
Our children's... You see what he's doing here? With the analogies that he's drawing, he's arguing that parents are forcing their young children to take medications that they don't want to take, or to have surgeries that they don't want to take, or to transition when they don't want to transition.
This doesn't happen. And if it does, it's infinitesimally small. And if it is the case that the child does not actually wish to transition in any way, and it is being forced upon them by the parents, I am against that as well. But it doesn't happen. It is very, very, very infinitesimally small, statistically insignificant if it even does happen. It is more common for parents to force their kids to conform to the gender they were assigned at birth, a lot of the times in abusive ways if the kids have gender non-conforming tendencies, than it is for the inverse, for parents to force their kids to transition. But Matt Walsh is okay with child abuse just only if it agrees with his ideology.
What happens? You know, children have a say in the process. Children are allowed to make their own decision. Of course, with the help of medical professionals, of course. But like this whole part that Johnny's like, I don't want to eat worms. That would be the end of it. That's the end of it. Johnny doesn't want to eat worms. No worms for Johnny. No worms.
True.
I will say we got exactly the reaction to the doctor.
You could say the same argument for people pushing religion on their children. True. There's a lot of abuse that goes on with kids when it comes to pushing certain religion on them and constricting them in certain ways, especially into early adulthood to adulthood.
Her page with the bone saw that I had in mind when we included that page, and I fought for that page. Now, there was, I will tell you a little bit behind the scenes, there was some discussion over here about that particular page with the doctor.
Wait, there are actually people on Matt Walsh's side in the production of this book that thought that the bone saw spooky doctor page might not be a good idea? There are actually more reasonable people around Matt Walsh than him? That's actually kind of perplexing.
I said, that's got to be in there.
Thank God.
And it was. No, Sam, but see, you say children make their own decisions, but children can't make their own decisions. If I'm arguing that a certain
so
course
children make decisions with the help of their parents or guardians and the help of, in this case, medical professionals, which is what Samantha said. There was nothing incorrect there. We're just deciding to not hear that, I suppose?
It does no good to retort that the child wants to do it. Children who want to do harmful things should still be prevented from doing those things.
How harmful are we talking? I guess it depends on your definition of harmful. So for instance, if the child wants to cut their friend's hand off, obviously we shouldn't allow your child to cut their friend's hand off. I think that's harmful to them and themselves. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about this child has certain gender non-conforming predilections. So maybe it's a girl and they like to play with action figures and they don't like wearing dresses and they prefer to wear pants and whatever else. We'll be like, I wonder if there's anything more than just aesthetic choices here. Now, it is possible to be a girl, to be interested in action figures, to be interested in sports, to be interested in wearing stereotypically boy or men's clothes, and still be a girl. But there are some questions that will arise about it. And if you go through the proper procedures to try to analyze your kid and figure all this kind of stuff out, you might come to the determination, well, no, this is just a girl who likes to play and wear boys' clothes. You know? But maybe you find out like, oh, this is a girl who actually would prefer to, in society, be seen as a boy and be interacted with as a boy. And then you go through the whole process of helping them to achieve that goal, which is affirming of them, which is helpful for them, which allows them to live a better life. If you try to actively go against that, if this girl likes to play with action figures and wear boys' clothes, and you stop her from doing that and force her from doing other things like wearing dresses and playing with dolls or whatever else, that's abusive. You shouldn't do it. Because obviously they don't want to. You're forcing them to do something they don't want, which obviously you've outlined is a bad thing, considering you think parents are forcing kids to be trans.
Why? Because they're children. They don't understand what they're saying. They don't know what they want. And often they don't actually want what they think they want. At Red Robin the other day, my 5-year-old told me he wanted to order salmon. for his dinner. Now, I knew
That is true. How are you going to Red Robin in the year of our Lord 2022? And I forgot that place even existed. And then also to go to Red Robin and order salmon. Obviously, Matt Walsh's kid, out of their mind. No shot. I'm pretty sure Red Robin is known for its chicken. That's probably a better play.
knew damn well that that kid did not want salmon.
Wanting McDonald's is the same as wanting to be male or female, true.
He wanted chicken tenders and fries because that's what he always wants, and it's the only thing he'll ever actually eat at a restaurant.
That being said, instead of just not getting the salmon for your kid, how about if you like salmon as the adult in the situation and you're not sure if your kid would like it, order it for yourself and then have them try it and then get them the chicken if they don't like it. That's also a play. You might learn that your kid doesn't like salmon, or maybe you might learn that they do. And it is your position as the parent here to help them learn that they like salmon or not.
So I didn't let him have the meal that he wanted because I knew that he didn't really want.
Are you roasting so hard? I don't know why I'm trying so hard on this video. It's an 11-minute 52 video from Matt Walsh. You're right. I probably shouldn't be trying so hard, but for the entertainment value of the people watching, I liked it.
Because he's a kid. And that's just for something as frivolous as a meal at Red Robin. What if your son says he wants to become a girl?
Uh-huh.
Or a salmon, for that matter. Not only can you be sure that he doesn't really want that because he doesn't understand what he's saying or what it means or what the implications are, because he can't, because he's just a kid, but also...
So that's where you come in, Matt Walsh. As a parent, which apparently you are to 4 children, that's where you come in. So if your child is like, I want to be a girl, but I'm a boy right now, that's where you start engaging with your child like another human being and trying to explain such concepts to them in an educational capacity to help them further understand what it means to be a boy but feel like you want to be a girl. And then you go to medical professionals and continue the process of figuring it all out. But that is only if you want to be a good parent. And I don't know if Matt Walsh particularly cares about that.
So in this case, whereas it's at least possible to actually order salmon, it's not possible for him to actually become a girl. Which is reason enough.
This is not true, by the way, and it's objectively not true, because gender is presentation. It's a societal construct. We have invented it. We can change the way that people interpret it. We can normalize gender nonconforming behavior in society in general. There's a lot of different ways that people can transition from being a man to a woman or a woman to a man or whatever. It's possible. It's just that Matt Walsh is not sufficiently educated enough to understand it.
Not give him what he says he wants. All right, let's skip ahead again and see if
maybe, actually, I think I've got the synthesis here, okay? If Matt Walsh is very excited about the fact that he's written a children's book, and he claims to be an authority on the writing of children's books, so obviously he thinks he has a lot to say about it, perhaps we could get him a pro-trans educational book made for children so that he could read it, and then it would then be at a level where his mental capacity could actually comprehend it. And then maybe he'll change his mind and understand that he's wrong on literally everything he's talking about.
What's the moral of the story? What's the lesson here? Aren't children's books supposed to have like a lesson that's, clear? Because I don't know what this is trying to say. I don't know what this lesson here is. Ask a kid, do you know what this book is about? Because none of them did. You could argue that this book is made for adults. Write a book for adults.
It is kind of in that way too, I think. From what we've seen, it doesn't seem like the book is written exceptionally well in order to give information to children in a way that they can understand it. It seems like it's kind of like just a thing to do for clout. It seems like you're just marketing to the parents that they should buy this thing so that you can get money and also potentially maybe spread your propaganda.
Or is it that you have to dumb down these analogies and these arguments for children brain because they don't hold any weight in actual adult language? But yeah, that is it for this video. What do you guys think? You gonna go get Johnny the Walrus the book?
Nope.
Well, since you asked, what do I think? I think you should probably in the future have some kind of rebuttal if you're gonna make a rebuttal video.
Now, from the selected pieces we've gotten in this video from Samantha Lux's video, it didn't seem like there were the greatest rebuttals. I won't lie. But I also don't know that that's the style of content that Samantha Lux makes. Could just be the case that they're clowning on him because it's easy to clown on Matt Walsh. Fair's fair. But Matt Walsh's rebuttals to Samantha Lux's supposed rebuttals were not good either. Kind of dog shit. Kind of defeated by children book level understandings of gender. So I don't know why you'd be so excited about your performance or Samantha's underperformance in your mind.
Rebutted my points in the same way that my dog rebuts the deer that he sees running through the backyard by just barking incoherently at them.
This ain't a mirror, Matt. Go practice somewhere else.
Yeah, you're right that I did dumb down the arguments and analogies, but apparently I wasn't able to make them dumb enough for you to understand. My story about a kid pretending to be a walrus was, it would seem, slightly above your reading level. And that's a shame because it's a message that you might have really benefited from.
You think so?
And instead,
I think Samantha Lux is living a very good life, it would seem. I mean, she's popping off. She's got a good YouTube channel. She's making content people enjoy. She's enjoying her aesthetic presentation, I would imagine as well, contrary to what would have been forced upon her by society. Seems to be doing pretty well. I don't know.
Dad, I'm forced to say, finally, Samantha Lux, that you are, sadly, tragically, canceled. Well, I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Matt Walsh Show. If you did, go...
I didn't. The irony, ooh, it's Gothics. I have not watched enough Gothics content. What does she sound like? The irony of you're accusing Matt for writing a book that kids don't understand, as if kids actually comprehend transsexualism. The irony of posting this kind of a comment when you yourself don't understand transsexualism. Come on now. Come on now. People who project their sexuality as the most important thing about them don't have much to add to society. I don't know that many people actually do this. And I think the reason why people do this, if they do, it's a way to compensate for the fact that society is actively pushing against them. So you will go above and beyond representing your gender identity and sexuality in order to combat people actively pushing against you and trying to make your life harder. That's the whole point of like pride, being out and proud, because it is a good way, an offensive measure to rebut the ills of society, you know, rearing their ugly head toward you because you happen to like to wear dresses as a man or something. Also, it's not sexuality that we're talking about. Nowhere in this video did we talk about sexuality. Sexuality as a concept, not in the book, not in Samantha Lux's reaction, not in Matt Walsh's reaction. Did we ever talk about sexuality? It never came up. This person was not watching the video, apparently. Kids aren't old enough to comprehend this. So we're unironically thinking that it's easier to explain to a kid about a human being transitioning to a non-human animal like a walrus. And it's somehow more difficult to explain a human being transitioning from one way of looking to another. Okay, dude. Nice. Anime profile picture, by the way. Transphobic anime profile picture. Shocker. Literally prove the point of your book. Adults are forcing dangerous ideas onto children when they cannot understand the concepts. Children are being used as test subjects, and it's about time we put a stop to it. That's literally what the opposite end of the spectrum when it comes to gender identity and the way we force certain people to act a certain way because of the chromosomes they have. You're literally upset about, quote unquote, adults forcing dangerous ideas onto children when that's literally what conservatives will do in regards to making boys act like boys and women and girls act like girls. Like I say, conservatives, totally okay with abusing children. They're absolutely fine with it. It's just only if they're the ones doing it. Anyway, the people in the comments are always going to be, if they're in agreement with Matt Walsh's position, will always not be as smart as Matt Walsh is. And that's sad because that is a very low bar to clear. So it's only worth reading them for the memes. Well, as it would turn out, trans people continue to boggle the mind of very simple people like Matt Walsh and his fans. It is just another indicator that trans people and gender non-conforming people are just far too powerful. They are way too powerful for these simple-minded people to understand, comprehend, and in that way, we're still winning. It's just a longer battle because these people like Matt Walsh have institutional systemic power on their hands, but we'll get there. Do not worry. One day, we will eradicate the problem of child abuse in regards to gender expression from conservative households. As much as they want to claim it and keep it as their own, we will eradicate it so that nobody can do it, okay? I promise you that. We're gonna win so much it'll make your head spin. Believe me. This video is kind of called as any longtime community member, literally always in the live stream chat, also a Twitch streamer themselves. Very much appreciate the continued support, and I hope you have enjoyed your stay. If you'd like to be the next CONURE callout, all you gotta do is follow me on Twitter, @CONURECC, retweet my video links when they go live. You know the damn deal. Remember to subscribe to the channel. Put all notifications on when you hit the bell. Really helps me out a lot. Make sure you get every video. Also, leave a like if you like. Comment something validating to trans people down below. And have an incredible time doing whatever it is you are currently doing or are about to do after having watched this YouTube video. Take it easy.